Nie może mi prosić.
Erbarmlich.
We're supposed to be using a stock 19, but the stock 19 that we have here, and we did bring one, has an aftermarket slide stop that unfortunately my support hand hits and the gun basically doesn't function with my hand on it. The guy who owns the gun, no problems for him. So we're using what was my Roland Special. I took the KKM and compensator off of it. The point of impact might be a little different, but not too much. I did turn the red dot off, so that's not factoring into the shooting. If you want to come and take a look, red dot off, and I'll be shooting it like that for the remainder of this video. So, alright, so I spent some time with the Glock 19 and a CZ P10C. I've drawn some conclusions. I've spent, this isn't my only time shooting these guns. I've shot thousands of rounds. I've lost count out of Glock 19s and Glock 17s, but a lot of time on Glock 19s. I've shot maybe 1,000 rounds out of the P10C in total. You know, draw from that what you will. I don't miss as much time on the P10C as I do on the Glock 19, but I think that I can drop some conclusions to help you make the right decision when it comes time to purchase one of these guns. The big thing for me is not for me, but in general, because people are going to draw conclusions between these two guns because they're so similar and they're both hitting the same market. They even fit the same holsters sometimes. They don't fit G-code holsters. I know that because I've got G-code holsters, but if you've been watching this video, then you'll know that they do fit Safariland holsters. The recoil impulse between these guns is actually unique. It feels initially as if the CZ P10C actually has a lower recoil impulse, but it really doesn't. On shooting, I feel like the front sight was back on target a lot faster with the Glock 19 than with the P10C. The P10C, however, it was almost as if I could track the front sight moving easier than with the Glock. It's almost as if you follow me, as I was shooting, I felt it and then snap back down again. And it's almost as if recovery was easier on the P10 and it was recovering on its own in comparison to the Glock, where I feel like I have to do a lot of the work to get it to recover from recoil. The Glock, and of course this wasn't the Glock that I was shooting, this is the Glock that we brought out. As you can see here, it's got an extended slide stop, and my giant, I wouldn't even call these bear claws, bear claws, bitch, compared to my hands. My giant hands really just, they activated the slide stop and it really wouldn't work. It's not the gun's fault. It's the slide stop and the size of my hands. Most people use these and they work fine. For me, it just doesn't really work, but that's okay, because I've shot thousands, tens of thousands of rounds out of Glock 19s. And the Glock 19's initial recoil, it feels like there's almost nothing there. I mean, there is, obviously, and you can see the front sight. It's barely perceptible. You can watch it jump up a little bit and then come back on target. But it feels rougher on the hand, if that makes any sense. Ergonomics, this is where these guns get really interesting. You know, that word gets thrown around a lot, ergonomics this, ergonomics that, and they go, oh, you want the 1911 style grip, or you want this style grip, and you know what? That doesn't really hold a lot of weight with me. Ergonomics can be changed. For example, for me, my Glock 19 has a magwell on it, not to facilitate faster reloads, but to help me get my pinky finger on the gun easier. It's not so much a problem on the P10C. It's just a smidge longer, and that smidge does make a difference. But I think that the ergonomics of the gun help a lot more in perceived recoil than actual recoil performance. I mean, this is a much wider grip when you have the large back strap. If you put the large back strap on the Glock 19, it's obviously a little bit bigger, but then it gets a little bit more unwieldy. This is much more wieldy. This feels almost like a VP9. And where it fails, where the VP9 succeeds, and most other guns with adjustable back straps fail and the VP9 succeeds, is in the lateral back straps. On the VP9, you can get larger ones, and on my VP9, I have the biggest ones on there just to fill my giant palms. And this gun doesn't have that, and I think that going forward, CZ should probably look into doing that. But other than that, in terms of ergonomics, the CZ P10C does blow the Glock 19 out of the water a little bit. I can push the heel of my palm forward when I'm shooting it, almost like a 1911. I've been shooting 1911s for a long time. Okay, boomer. So that's what I think really contributes to the different recoil impulses on these guns. We're splitting hairs. I've been shooting for a long time now at this point, so for me it's, you know, oh well, there's a slight difference here, a slight difference there, but recoil impulse shouldn't be the reason why you choose one of these two guns, and I'll tell you that straight away. And now we're going to go on to the trigger. Now the next point that everyone always brings up when it comes to these striker fire guns is the trigger, and something that I'm going to tell you is that that's all subjective, and I've actually seen there are differences between triggers on each Glock on the same production lines I've seen. So this Glock 19 is going to have a different trigger feel than my Glock 34, than my Glock 19, and that's just the way it is. But we'll compare, since there's a general feel for Glock triggers. I'm going to compare the Glock 19 trigger to the P10C the best of my ability. On shooting it, what's most noticeable is when you have the initial take up and you hit this wall, the wall is much more noticeable than on the Glock. That said, the weight on the initial wall, I don't know what the actual trigger weight is, we'll overlay that information later on in the video, but it feels heavier than the Glock 19. And when you go to pull it, there's no additional take up like with the Glock, it just breaks. There is a slight, I wouldn't say take up, but a little bit of a notch in it, where you can feel almost, as you can see, the take up is a little gritty. When you're shooting it and you're going kind of quick, it's not as noticeable, but after you get that initial take up and you go to break the trigger, you'll notice there is a small shelf on there almost, what it feels like in the way the trigger breaks. It's not an STI. Let's be real. It's not a 1911. It's not a single action CZ. It's not a Shadow or a 75. But it's okay. It's not bad. The reset's also not terrible. Oh, I just completely bungled that, but whatever. The reset is just, you know, it's tactile, and when you get back on to the wall, there's no additional take up. You can just break the trigger again, which is really nice. I mean, you can say that with Glocks and most other guns, but there is some little bit of give on a lot of the striker fire guns that I've fired when you pull it again after the reset. And the P10C doesn't have that, so you can shoot it pretty quick, which is what I like. And you'll see that I did shoot 3 rounds from retention. I'm not going to point any fingers or blame anybody, but we only have 1 magazine for this gun out today. But I did shoot fast, I did shoot from retention, and the trigger is really easy to shoot fast. Way easier than a Glock, actually, which is pretty interesting. Now, the Glock's trigger, everybody knows the Glock's trigger. You have mush, more mush, more mush, and then break, and then reset. And the reset's kind of low. Of course, you can change anything in the Glock trigger and to make it closer to the P10C, but you wouldn't necessarily want to do that with aftermarket options. You can make the Glock 19 better than the P10C. I haven't tried any of the aftermarket P10C options, but something to pay attention to is that CZ is gaining some additional market share in the aftermarket for these striker fire guns, and from what I've seen, between that and with P320, there is some competition now. So Glock does have a run for its money. Now, let's talk about
size.
We bring up size because everybody wants to carry these guns. Not necessarily everybody. You know, I do get the question all the time where somebody goes, "Hey, what gun should I get for carry?" And I'm usually like, something like a Glock 19 or something in similar size. Well, is that the full size? Well, no, it's the compact. Well, I like the Glock 43. The Glock 26 is a compact, right? No, it's a subcompact. That gun is a bitch. I hate the Glock 26. I hate the Glock 27. I hate all those micro guns. Subcompacts, micro guns, just not my thing. But that's me going on a rant. Whatever. So if you're going to get one of these, they're both compacts. You can carry both of them. You can carry them all year long. You can carry them in the summer. You can carry them in the winter. So now we're going to have to compare their sizes. And it's inevitable. All right, we will start with length. As you can see from the top here, the difference in length between these two guns is minimal. If anything, it's like 1/100 of an inch difference. The actual measurements are 7.3 inches for the P10C and 7.28 for the Glock 19. So really for length, it's not that much of a difference, and in carrying it, length doesn't make much of a difference. For me, I feel a difference when I'm appendix carrying because the longer guns will hit me in the nuts. But that's neither here nor there. Now we're going to talk about you want to hear about girth? Anyway, so in terms of width, they're both equally thick 1C with a K, because neither of these guns are very thick. 1.26 inches for both of them. That's pretty remarkable, actually, in terms of actual width. I mean, these guns are very close. You can tell that CZ was gunning for the P10, for the Glock 19 when they were designing this thing. And, you know, for the most part, they did hit the mark. I mean, there are some things that I would change about it, but to be better than the Glock 19, but I'll give you my conclusions when it's done, but they did a really good job on hitting this mark. Next is weight. The CZ is a little heavier. I can feel that on these two. The CZ does feel a little heavier. Of course, that's conjecture, but we're talking about like 2¼ ounces. Actually, not even that. Not even 2¼ ounces. Don't tell Nut and Fancy that I said that the P10C is a little heavier. He might actually break his hip. The trigger weight, it's the same. They feel a little different, but the trigger weight is the same. And I can kind of say that they do feel the same. And of course, there's going to be differences between each, but the published weights are identical. Capacity is identical. 15 rounds in the mag. One area where the Glock 19 does have an advantage is in the size of the magazines, as you can see over here. If I hold them up nearly close to each other, the P10 mag is a bit bigger, longer, and not quite girthy, are we? But when they're in the gun, there is a difference in length, and I think that has more to do with the ergonomics of the gun. As you can see, everyone knows about the Glock hump, and when you put these guns directly on their sights right over here, and they're laying on their backs and ready for you to dominate them, the Glock is a touch shorter, and that's not necessarily because, you know, the Glock is that much different than the P10C. I think that's just the way that the grip was designed with the ergonomics of the Glock. It makes the gun a little bit shorter, and it's a little bit easier to conceal because the grip length is what makes a difference. Now, as soon as you add a mag well to this Glock 19, all that goes out the window. So if you're going to add a mag well to your Glock 19, you probably consider a P10C too. And that brings me to my last 2 points. The cost of ownership and the aftermarket. The cost of ownership on these two guns is roughly identical. There is a big difference, and I'll get to that here in a little bit. But the primary companies that have done most of my work, they all work on the P10C for the same price as the Glock 19. Jaegerworks, Mod K Armory that ported my 34, I think even ATEI. They all do optic cuts, porting. Well, Mod K does porting, optic cuts, slide serrations. You can find anybody that'll stipple a Glock will usually stipple a P10C. The cost of ownership between these two guns in terms of setting them up for you and how you use it is going to be pretty much identical. There is one caveat, however, and that is price of the magazines. The cheapest I've seen these in my research has been about $35, $36. The cheapest I've seen Glock mags, OEM Glock mags, is $20. That's a pretty big difference when you're buying 5 to 10 magazines at a time. It's a big difference when you need to outfit an entire box full of magazines. I'm not rich, but I do spend a lot of my money on gun stuff, and I have a box, a literal like Pelican case full of Glock magazines, just because I can afford to buy, 5, 10 at a time. With the P10C, the cheapest I've seen them is $36, usually around $40, $45. 2 mags is $90, $80, plus shipping. That's a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're buying 10 mags, that's $400. This gun is $400. You're going to spend as much money as the gun on magazines. And, for some people, that's not necessarily doable. I've drawn my conclusions. In conclusion, really, it comes down to what you want to spend your money on, because you can buy a P10C for maybe $100 less brand new than you can a Glock 19, and a Glock 19 is going to cost you $500 to $525 usually, from what I've seen. So it comes down to, what do you want to spend your money on? You want to spend a little less money on the gun itself and more money on the magazines, or do you want to spend more money on the gun and a little bit less on the magazines? That's up to you. Other than that, the guns perform almost identical. It's very similar. They're both great guns. You think you'd be fine either way. It depends on what you want to spend your money on. And those are my conclusions.